Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for being here this evening and for your commitment as we're in the home stretch of election season. I'm Kalina Meyerchek, pronouns she, her, advocacy manager at AAUW, and I'm really grateful to be here with you all. I will be sharing a lot of resources this evening so that you have everything you need going into Election Day and beyond. But don't worry about capturing everything right now. The recording from today, the slides, and all the resources that we mentioned will be shared with you after the webinar. To quickly review tonight's conversation, we'll discuss key issues for women voters heading into the election, particularly Gen Z voters and women across demographic groups. We'll cover state ballot initiatives that we're tracking and how our AAUW states are engaging. We'll talk about combating disinformation around voting and the election and what you can all be doing proactively in your communities. We'll discuss how to navigate some other barriers we're seeing in election season and beyond, and we'll be sure to address as many questions as I can, so please feel free, again, to drop those in the chat as we go along. And then we will round out the night with a reminder to make a plan to vote and share the information that you've learned here tonight. With that, I will go ahead and get us started. So, as we know, voting is personal. Everyone has something that matters to them and something in their life that will be impacted by the elections. And this election season, we hope that folks are having intergenerational conversations in their communities and listening to a diversity of voices on what matters most to them heading into this election. And one way that our team at National is listening to this is through YWCA's recent national survey on the top priorities among women, non-binary, and gender-expansive registered voters. And I was grateful to attend YWCA's Why Women Vote Gen Z National Town Hall in Philadelphia in the beginning of September to hear from a diverse group of Gen Z panelists on their perspectives on the election and the issues addressed in YWCA's survey. And one of those panelists was Leilani Enti, who was a former AAUW policy intern, who many of you may have seen, on our social media. So we were grateful to have her up there. I will share, there was excitement and there was anxiety. It can be really overwhelming to think about all of these issues and what's at stake in this election, but I did want to highlight a couple of interesting findings from the survey. So in the survey, women across generations, racial and ethnic groups, economic status, region, and political spectrum said that the economy and the cost of living is the most important issue to them. And Gen Z women are very focused on the economy and their economic security, but we do see some differences across generations and demographic groups. For example, Gen Z women prioritized abortion access, racial justice, childcare, and police violence more than other generations of women. And Black, Latina, Asian American, and Pacific Islander women were more likely than women overall to name diversity, equity, and inclusion as an issue impacting them personally. Native women were the most likely of any racial group to name domestic and sexual violence as a top issue impacting them. Now, it may seem surprising, like it did to some of the audience, that issues like childcare are critically important to Gen Z women voters, even more so than other generations. And even if it's not something that some of them may need in this moment, they care about their futures. These are the types of policy issues that impact their decisions and the directions of their lives. And a lot of these are at stake in this election. So that's something that a lot of the panelists expressed. Overall, the findings that were, though women across generations and backgrounds are prioritizing and looking at issues differently based on their lived experiences, all the women who participate in the survey care about economic security, bodily autonomy, and health and well-being. And understanding what matters most to people is critically important in an election year. But this work also continues after the election in thinking about how that understanding can inform your advocacy and help bring members of your community in. And I do want to make another plug for our voter issue guide that we released earlier this year that covers a lot of these issues, including paid family and sick leave, reproductive rights and abortion access, pay equity, voting rights, and a lot of other critical issues. So I would encourage folks to check those out. Even more directly, these are ballot issues in a lot of states this year. So we know that you are really engaged on ballot measures in your states. We're working with our state policy leaders on their advocacy, and we're seeing members, around the country advocating on these really critical issues at stake on the ballot this election. We're seeing abortion on the ballot in 11 states. And we're also seeing a range of issues, right? So education, marriage equality, climate, minimum wage, long-term care, school board elections, the Equal Rights Amendment, and more. So we encourage you all to check out our AAUW Action Fund ballot issues webpage, which I will be sure to share with you all following the call. And our social media for National Voter Education Week, and we'll continue to do so. We've been highlighting our AAUW state advocacy on some of these really critical ballot measures. So I wanted to continue to uplift those as we move into the last couple of weeks before the election. I do want to acknowledge that we know disinformation around voting and the election has been rampant, particularly now with social media facilitating its spread and amplification. So I just wanted to review again how to spot disinformation and what you can do proactively in your communities to prevent it from spreading. So when you see something, maybe it's social media or online, that is interesting that you want to share, pause first to check your facts. Look into the source that the information is coming from, and do this especially when what you're seeing evokes a strong emotional response. That's actually a common disinformation tactic and can be a good telling point that you should look a little bit closer, again, at the information. If you do encounter disinformation about the election, as we have this graphic here, don't repeat it, don't reply to it, or share it out. We don't want to inadvertently amplify disinformation narratives. Instead, you can flag the content for a social media platform you're on and report it. And we'll also, I'll drop in the chat in a minute and share with you all after the call a website like tip line from our partners where you can report election disinformation. And this helps to track and combat it. But looking, for the next 3 weeks through the election and beyond, we encourage you all to be sharing truthful information about voting in your communities. So direct folks to reliable, accurate information on what voting logistics, vote by mail, drop boxes, and ballot collection look like in your state and locality. And we'll share some of these resources in a few minutes when we talk about making a plan to vote, or your state or Board of Election websites is also a really good place to go. Another point is to remind folks that we may not get results on election night. So it may take longer to count ballots due to an influx of mail-in ballots. And the most important thing is that all ballots are counted and all voices are heard. But it's good to share this expectation so folks know what election like and the days following might look like. And no matter how you decide to vote, states use a variety of methods to count and verify ballots. So you can emphasize that with folks, and the more specific information to your state and locality, the better. There are, let's see, I will pull my slides down. All right, there are a couple of other issues as we look forward to the election season beyond that I do want to touch on. And then this was meant to be a panel, but my team is sort of divide and conquering tonight. So then I will just open it up to you all for any questions that you may have in the chat. So first thing I'll start with is that there's been a lot of discussion, or we've heard that one of the reasons that people don't vote is because they think their vote doesn't matter. And I would flag that one of the things that came out of the YWCA survey is that after learning about the issues at stake in this election, more women said they felt their vote has the power to affect change. So understanding what matters to voters and connecting them to what's at stake in the election can help generate that sense of power and hopefully get them out to vote. So continue to educate and engage your community and to make that connection between voting and real life impact. And one of the ways to do that is to highlight the importance of down ballot races. You know, some of the issues that came up in the survey and in our voter issue guide, we're not seeing on the ballots yet, but will certainly be impacted by the down ballot races, like childcare, like diversity and equity and inclusion. For example, who the Attorney General is in your state will have a huge impact. Yes, we know it's a big presidential election year, but it's also for Congress, right? We have 435 House seats and 33 Senate seats that will be decided. And it's also a very critical year for state and local governance. It's, let's see, over 21,000 school board seats and almost 6,000 state legislator seats that will be decided this election. And those, again, have a really critical impact on the day-to-day of people's lives in your state and community. We also know that some folks may be tired about the top of the ticket fight because it's so partisan, but there's so many important seats to be decided again down the ballot, and there's ways that we can be engaging as AAUW collectively, talking about the issues, talking about how to get out to vote in a nonpartisan way. So let's see, I think now I'd like to open it up to any questions. I don't see any in the chat right now. I'll give folks a minute in case a question has come up. Anything about what I've said or questions about heading into election day and beyond. All right. I am not seeing any questions yet. Again, feel free to drop those in the chat as I go along. I will, let's see. I will touch a little bit more on what can be done to address disinformation. And then I will go over make a plan to vote, see if there are any more questions, and then be sure to share all these resources with you all. So as I mentioned, let me share my screen again. All right. As I mentioned, when we see disinformation narratives, think about who could be harmed and who would benefit from those narratives, right? So focus on the why. Think about why actors are spreading the disinformation. It may be to sow confusion or fear or discourage a particular group of voters from making their voices heard, but focus on the context when talking about disinformation rather than amplifying the narrative itself. And again, think about truthful sources of information that you can point folks to. Let me just make sure I am reading the chat. Okay, I see one about the YWCA conference, which I spoke about at the beginning. I will certainly share this survey, but I can speak a little bit more to that. And then I will get a little bit more into the voter protection piece when I talk about making a plan to vote. But first, for YWCA conference, I would say I think what really struck me was how passionate the Gen Z panelists were about these issues, how engaged they already were on their college campuses, in their communities. And I think that can be sort of a common myth about younger voters. And I think it was really important to have centered and uplifted their voices and work to dispel that. I also think, like the survey results said, it's really critical to pay attention to the experiences of particular groups of women that might not have been historically highlighted in these conversations about the election and what matters to voters, particularly to women voters. So again, would invite you all to think about how you can be having those conversations in your communities leading up to the election and beyond. I also think it was really just an inspiring point for unity. Like, here are all these women across backgrounds, across generations that came together around these core issues because we care and because we want to see positive change. There were even groups, like school groups, who were brought to the conference or the town hall that can't even vote yet, but they were filling out, our Is My Vote signs about why they're excited to vote, why they're looking forward to voting, and why it matters to them. So we're seeing, again, an age range across backgrounds really engaged here. And these are the types of relationships and conversations that can be built now and can continue through the next, the next election, presidential election cycle, in the next 10 years. Like, this is work that is really important and can continue. I also see a question about, let's see, impact of letters to the editor. Absolutely. We are working with some of our state leaders, particularly on states with reproductive rights ballot initiatives, to be submitting letters to the editor on those. And I also would point folks, which I can drop in the chat again, would point folks to our advocacy toolkit that has a page on writing op-eds and LTEs. But thank you for uplifting that, Sue. It's a really important advocacy tool because it reaches a broader audience, like it goes beyond the AAUW membership and maybe some of our, typical circles. So absolutely. Are there any more questions that folks have and would like to drop in the chat before I go to making a plan to vote and talking a little bit about voter protection? I'll give it just a couple seconds. Absolutely agree that the seeds we plant now are important for every election in the long haul. Absolutely. Yep. And I think that was one of the takeaways from YWCA. Like, the reason that we're holding these conversations is to uplift these voices and build this community and these spaces and get this started now, but also for everyone's future and for future generations that weren't even present there. So thank you for that. I will keep an eye on the chat, but I do want to make sure that I cover making a plan to vote. All right, so as we are looking ahead to Election Day, hopefully everyone is making their plan to vote. Or if you've already voted, as is happening in some states, ask your friends and family and members of your community what their plan is. So we know that voters who make a plan, including how and where to vote, are more likely to follow through on Election Day. So I want to talk a little bit about how to make your plan to vote. And again, if you already have or if you voted, be the messenger in your circles that shares this information and helps people to do the same. So first step here, check your registration. There have been, unfortunately, in Oklahoma and Virginia, for example, incidences of voter roll purges, and recently within 90 days of the election. So it's always good to check your voter registration again. Another important step is to know what and who is on your ballot. And Vote 411 from the League of Women Voters is a great resource for this, which I know a lot of our AW folks are aware of and engaged in. And next, plan the logistics of how you're going to cast your ballot. So maybe that's mail-in, maybe you're going to a drop box or to a polling location in person during early voting or on Election Day. So know where you're going to vote, when you're going, and how you're getting there. And also make sure to check if your state requires ID or documentation for voting. And especially if you're going on an election day, prepare for some long lines. And remember that if you are in line at the time that the polling place closes, you have the right to vote. So stay in line and cast your ballot. The next piece gets more to voter protection. If your voting rights are challenged at the polls, or if you see voter suppression or intimidation happening at your poll, the Nonpartisan Election Protection Coalition has hundreds of lawyers immediately available through the hotline listed here to help respond to any issues. So if someone else in your community needs help, you can share this number with them. And even if it's something you're not experiencing, you can be you know, an ally in your community, to make sure that people have the help they need and to share this information with them. And lastly, as we've mentioned, you know, help your friends and family make their plan to vote. You can be the advocate, you can be the messenger in your circles and communities, and share the information that you learned here tonight. I do want to end with looking ahead beyond the election, right? Because we said this work continues. We know that advocacy fatigue is real. It's something that, again, the Gen Z panel uplifted, that there's a sense of overwhelm and an inundation of information about the election. So be kind to yourself this election season and rest, because we're going to need to get ready for the day after the election. And thinking a little bit about what we talked about earlier, think about who are you listening to in your communities, right? Who are those diverse voices that you are centering and uplifting and hearing from? And also, you know, be honest about who you're a trusted source for. So who can you reach out to share this type of information and have these conversations? And where can you build relationships and community with folks who you aren't currently engaging? It will definitely be more important than ever to work with our whole communities to move things forward after this election into the next Congress and beyond. I'm seeing a question in the chat. Thank you, yes, for uplifting Protect the Vote. I would also add the Election Protection Coalition, which is nonpartisan, has volunteer opportunities in the same vein. And I would recommend Power the Polls if you want to volunteer to be a poll worker. And I can be sure to include the link that was dropped in the chat and those two that I just mentioned in the follow-up as well. Are there any other questions, comments before we close tonight? I want to make sure that I've heard everyone. All right. If not, we will keep this short and sweet. Thank you again for your understanding as we had some last minute changes with our team. But again, really appreciate everyone's enthusiasm. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for all your hard work this election season. And I will just preview, you'll be able to join us next month as we look ahead at women's economic security post-election with another webinar. So I will make sure that everyone has that information when it's available, and you'll certainly see that. So we're really excited about that too, to continue this conversation and the work that we can do after the election. So thank you all so much. Really appreciate you being here, and have a great evening. Thank you.